So, just got done with Bumblebee to prepare for Rise of the Beasts, and it was pretty good. There were a few major problems, but overall, I was very positive. I did like most of the film. What exactly is going on? Well, this is technically going to work with Rise of the Beast. This is a film prior to it, so they will be using this as a foundation, apparently. So, here, Optimus and the Autobots have to flee Cybertron, and they basically are sending Bumblebee to Earth to prepare for their coming. And the Decepticons are on hot pursuit, and so the film basically follows Bumblebee as he gets to Earth. He has some issues and problems, and he befriends Hailee, who plays Charlie in this film. And it's set in the 1980s, and they have a lot of retro music, a lot of callbacks to the original cartoon series, as well as a lot of references to the 80s. So on paper, I should really love this thing because I grew up with the 80s, more late 80s, but I do remember a lot of the 80s music and 80s culture. And that's kind of one of the major problems. It's kind of like on and off. Like the early sections with Cybertron are fantastic. They have a lot of great cameos with Soundwave, Starscream, RC. They really did a good job packing in the cameos. Overall, I think the tone was a little bit stronger than, quote, the main Bay films. This is less noisy. They're slightly more coherent. We kind of know where people are and where things are situated. But it did have a lot of weak moments because the 80s vibe was okay, but in certain places it didn't feel like the music choices or the plot made a lot of sense. And things just happened to get us going through the plot. And probably the major problem with the story is how the Decepticons fool people. And even in the dialogue, people are like, well, they're called Decepticons. We're trusting them because. And I get what they're trying to do, making fun of the Cold War and paranoia and things like that. But yeah, it felt a little bit all over the place. Still, the main performances were strong. I liked Bumblebee. The design was pretty good. And they do explain why it becomes a Volkswagen. It's a little too quick, but yeah, that was interesting and fun. And there is a lot of violence in this. I thought even for Transformers, like, wow, they're using gunfire quite a lot. So this is not for very small children. If your kid is around like 10 or older, it's appropriate. But if they're a little too young, yeah, there's some pretty vicious. Again, these are machines, but it's pretty bloody in certain places. So that was a little surprising. I know this is Bay Transformers, but I was a little shocked at how violent it got because the whole tone here is kind of sentimental. It's supposed to be a kind of coming of age. Charlie discovers herself, and Bumblebee has his big mission. And for those who don't know, they're new to Transformers as a whole. Bumblebee is kind of famous and infamous for being like one of the smaller of the Transformers. There are other small Transformers. He's not the only one, but he's kind of been a fan favorite because he's pretty tiny compared to the other Transformers. He gets himself into a lot of trouble because he's just too small to take on the Decepticons. He's kind of like this nice runt who never gives up. And I like the character. He's one of the few cases where they changed them from the G1 design. I didn't find it too bad, but I do find it a little clunky in places because early on he's pretty competent and he's able to take out one Decepticon completely alone, even when he's injured. But later he seems to have a lot of trouble with the Decepticons, so that felt a little strange. And I would say, even though the Transformers are voiced really strongly, and we don't have too much of Optimus, but he does a really big cameo, I like that a lot. So, yes, we have the classical Peter Cullen. That was pretty good. But on the Decepticon side, after the initial cameos, I think the main voice actors, who are Angela Bassett and Justin Theroux, I just don't think they fit. They just didn't really work for me. They're just functional. John Cena's pretty good, but he's just going through the basics. He's much better on Peacemaker. But you can definitely see some of the early promise. He's still definitely learning how to be an actor. They needed to work on that a little bit with editing or with some acting lessons, but he's still pretty good. So overall, it's a very enjoyable film. It doesn't give you too much for Rise of the Beast. It does give you the cameos with RC, so some of the people you've seen in the trailer will apparently be in the main film. So you can definitely see what they're sketching out with Rise of the Beast, but not too much. And unfortunately, this was a box office hit, but it's one of the lowest performing of the Transformers. In terms of ranking, I'd say this is above average. This is a lot better than the worst Transformers live action, but it probably is a little bit weaker because Michael Bay sometimes can make his style work. And I haven't seen The Last Night, so I can't give a full ranking. So maybe Last Night was actually pretty good. I've heard mostly bad things. So I'm going to give this a pretty strong grade. I'm going to give this a 7.5 and highly recommend it, but come in with like moderate expectations because yeah, at certain points the plot and the voice acting is not as strong as it could have been, but overall, yeah, it's pretty enjoyable fun, and it does set up Rise of the Beasts and leaves enough open for people to be surprised with the twists I'm sure they're going to have in that film.